Expert is a very rare and yet often unknown first-person shooter that was released for the PlayStation in 1996, and the game plays very similar to the likes of your old school Doom style games, where you have to traverse around different types of corridors and taking out enemies and terrorists while completing objectives to complete your missions. The game also has a very similar look and feel to even to the earlier Wolfenstein 3D game that would have been seen on the PC. That has a very similar look in terms of its graphical style, where you have the ability to explore, but you spend a lot of your time walking around very linear style corridors, opening doors, finding keys and flicking switches to open another area in the level, all while trying to avoid different types of enemies that can creep up on you at any time, and even other types of enemies that can do severe damage to you, that can literally kill you very, very quickly. So while it's an older type of game, you have to deal with the likes of the clunky elements of the controls that would have been reflective of the PlayStation at that time. But there is also a tactical style approach, as you can't just wander in and just gun everything down at will. If you do that, very quickly you'll find out that you will get overwhelmed and enemies will destroy you at a moment's notice. So you do have to take more of a cautious approach in how you engage with enemies, because even when you try to shoot them with various types of weapons, especially if you're using like a handgun and so forth, because the enemies are 2D sprites, they have a tendency to move around very fast, and sometimes you will end up shooting off shots and you'll end up missing them entirely, so you can end up wasting a lot of ammo trying to take them out. Now, depending on the levels, you do have the ability at the start of each level to change your weapon loadouts. So you'll always start off with your basic like combat knife, and then you can choose between primary or secondary weapons, where you can use like a handgun or a machine gun, or you can choose a grenade launcher or a shotgun and another variety of type of weapons, and you can also use grenades. And majority of the weapon types you can pick up throughout play. Now, you will eventually meet enemies that will drop various ammo types, but if you don't have the particular weapon, like say for instance a grenade launcher equipped on you at the time, you won't be able to pick up the ammunition for it, because again you won't be able to use it. So the whole premise of the game is that you're part of a tactical military squad that's sent into a hotel that has been overrun with terrorists making various demands and threats while taking hostages. And it's your goal to eradicate all of the enemy threats and to save any hostages within the building, and to again save everybody and to save the entirety of the building, to keep it all intact. So you have to couple the gameplay style with the mixture of trying to defeat enemies, even end of level bosses that you will meet at different stages throughout the game, while being aware of your weapon loadouts, because each weapon that you choose will have a direct impact on how you can proceed through levels, to know whether the level will be easier to approach or more difficult. And you also have to couple with that with the likes of the enemies that you have to face, but then you have to deal with solving puzzles, finding key cards or keys to unlock various doors or elevators to move up or down to the next levels. And then you have to pick up various weapon and health packages as well to obviously keep you engaged in combat. So if a player is taken out of the equation by the terrorists at any point, you will end up having to start the level from scratch. And the levels themselves can vary from being somewhat short to being quite long, and it all depends on how you progress through each level, depending on your play style, how cautious you are, how you're able to dispatch enemies, but even understanding the various puzzles and trying to find out various key cards so that you can again unlock different doors, because you will have to do a lot of backtracking in throughout each of the levels in this game. So you'll have to get one key card to open another area at the start of the level and vice versa, and with each new area you unlock will present a new challenge with new enemies to face. So you have to be always mindful of your surroundings in this game. As the funny thing is, this game is very often overlooked, and for most people they don't even know it exists, but this is a good solid shooter that I recommend if you're a fan of old school type of FPS shooters, especially on the PlayStation or on the consoles. This is definitely one of those games I think you should try out. It definitely has a really good balance of playability and also challenging features, but it is difficult. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's not, but if you're familiar with the likes of Wolfenstein 3D, which this game plays very like, you will be able to understand the various elements in the game. It had some decent graphics for its time, for what is represented, and it just offers something something unique and somewhat a little bit different to your typical style of FPS shooter seen at the time. And it does have some decent graphics, like the levels themselves are presented in 3D environments, even with 3D kind of objects, but your character and the enemy characters are all 2D sprites, so that does change up the dynamic to some degree, but it's very similar and reflective of Wolfenstein and even Doom or Duke Nukem that would have also been seen on the PlayStation and other types of FPS games as well, as that was the common norm for FPS games during the mid-90s, and that would be later changed with the implementation of full 3D visuals later on with games such as Quake and Quake 2 and so forth later on. But still, this is a good game to look into the history of the PlayStation and to just look at the types of games that were being represented and made at the time. And like I mentioned, there's very few people that even know that this game exists. There's very little information about this game online, and this game can sometimes often be referred to as like a hack of like Counter-Strike, even though it's not anything to do with Counter-Strike. But there would have been elements of this game that you would have been able to get copies of now, say on various areas years ago in various marketplaces, and what would have happened is you would have been able to, if you managed to modify your PlayStation, you would have been able to gain access to certain copies of games. And this game, primarily, if you actually happened to see it or to gain a copy of it, it wouldn't have been really known as Expert. Instead, the copy would have had Counter-Strike on it, so people would have thought that it was a Counter-Strike game that would have been on the PlayStation, but it isn't really. It has elements that kind of would remind you of it, but it isn't Counter-Strike. Essentially, it's its own game in its own right. Just many people just wouldn't even know the name of the game itself. But if you do happen to get your hands on it, or if you can even play it through emulation, it's one of those games, especially if you do like FPS games and primarily on the PlayStation, I do think it's another one of those games that you really should experience, as it does present many elements that I've discussed in the video, like with challenges and various different set pieces and various puzzle solving elements and a lot of exploration. It does present that in a good format and presents a unique balance that definitely will keep you on your toes for quite some time, as again, it's not an easy game to pick up and play, but it is enjoyable once you give it time. But I do recommend that you try it out and just to experience the game, at least to see what you think for yourself. And I would love to know your thoughts on Expert for the PlayStation, if you have managed to play it back in the day, and if so, what did you think of the game overall? Do you enjoy these older style of FPS games seen on the PlayStation or even on the PC or other types of consoles? And if so, what do you think of them overall? I'd love to hear whatever thoughts you do have of this game, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you have enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be updated of future videos. And if you would like to see more content on the channel around other types of FPS shooter games also seen on the PlayStation, then you can check out the playlist here on screen to see more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.